Corrosion inhibitor safety and handling, best practices. Corrosion occurs naturally and it can cause significant damage to metal. This is why many industries rely on corrosion inhibitors to protect against this damage. However, the use of corrosion inhibitors comes with certain health and safety risks that must be understood and managed. Handling and storing corrosion inhibitors requires attention to detail and adherence to best practices. This article will address everything you need to know about corrosion inhibitor safety and handling, including risk assessments, proper handling practices, and safe storage. Risk assessment. A risk assessment is essential when dealing with any hazardous material. This includes corrosion inhibitors. A risk assessment should evaluate the potential risks of the material to employees, contractors, and the public. The following risks should be considered. Inhalation, exposure to fumes or mist from corrosion inhibitors can cause respiratory issues. Skin contact, exposure to corrosion inhibitors can cause irritation, chemical burns, or allergic reactions. Ingestion, accidental ingestion of corrosion inhibitors can lead to toxicity and even death. Environmental impact, improper handling and disposal of corrosion inhibitors can pollute the environment and contaminate water supplies. It is essential that those handling or working with corrosion inhibitors have proper training and awareness of the potential risks. Proper handling practices. The following best practices should be followed to reduce the risk of harm when handling corrosion inhibitors. Personal protective equipment, proper such as gloves, apron, and face shields should be worn when handling any chemical, including corrosion inhibitors. Preparation. Keep the area where the corrosion inhibitors will be used clean and uncluttered. Make sure to prepare all equipment before beginning work to reduce the risk of exposure. Ventilation. Adequate ventilation is important when handling corrosion inhibitors. Maintain a well-ventilated workspace or use respiratory protection if a well-ventilated workspace is not possible. Mixing. When mixing corrosion inhibitors, always follow the manufacturer's instructions and use specialized equipment designed for this purpose. Disposal. Dispose of corrosive waste in approved containers, following local regulations, to avoid environmental contamination. Safe storage. Corrosion inhibitors should be stored in a cool, dry place. Be sure to keep these inhibitors far away from incompatible materials and avoid storing them near ignition sources. It's also important to keep the inhibitors in their original containers. Repackaging could lead to contamination, creating hazards for those who handle these materials. Emergency response. Accidents happen and it's important to be prepared for when they do. In case of overspill or accidental skin exposure, follow the incident-specific emergency response protocol and correct any unsafe behavior. If a spill happens, protect yourself with and contain the spill, aerating the space well and avoiding using contaminated water drains. Failure to contain the spill in accordance with local guidelines can harm the environment, as well as those who are responding to the spill. In case of accidental skin or clothing exposure, remove clothing and flush skin with water for at least 15 minutes. Seek immediate medical attention for any serious injury, and always have relevant treatment instructions present in case of accidental ingestion such as MSDS, Material Safety Data Sheet. Final thoughts. Proper safety and handling procedures for corrosion inhibitors are essential to prevent accidents and protect all involved parties. Personnel must be well equipped with the appropriate and training should be provided on proper handling procedures. Safe storage, emergency response, and environmental protection should also be considered when handling these materials. Corrosion inhibitors are an essential component of many industries, including oil and gas, automotive, and construction. Without these inhibitors, the corrosion rate of metals would be much higher, resulting in significant damage to equipment and structures. However, the use of these inhibitors comes with its own set of risks that cannot be ignored. One of the dangers associated with corrosion inhibitors is inhalation. Exposure to fumes or mist from these inhibitors can cause respiratory problems such as coughing and difficulty breathing. Prolonged exposure could result in more severe respiratory issues. To mitigate this risk, proper ventilation is required. Working in a well-ventilated area or using respiratory protection can reduce the risk of respiratory ailments. Skin contact is another risk associated with the handling of corrosion inhibitors. Exposure to these inhibitors can cause skin irritation, chemical burns, or allergic reactions. To protect against in exposure, it is important to wear the appropriate personal protective equipment. Protective gloves, aprons, and face shields offer an additional layer of protection. Accidental ingestion of corrosion inhibitors can be fatal. To prevent accidental ingestion, workers who handle these substances should always wash their hands before eating or drinking. When storing corrosion inhibitors, they should be kept out of reach of children and animals. If ingestion occurs, medical help should be sought immediately. Proper storage is critical when dealing with hazardous materials. Corrosion inhibitors should be stored in a cool, dry place away from incompatible materials. Storing these inhibitors near ignition sources is not recommended as they can be flammable. In addition, proper labeling of the containers is essential to ensure that they are not mistaken for other chemicals. If an accident does occur, it is important to be prepared to respond quickly. An incident-specific emergency response protocol should be in place, outlining the necessary steps to take in the event of a spill or other incident. Workers should be aware of this protocol and trained in its proper execution. While corrosion inhibitors are vital to keeping equipment and structures in good condition, it is important to prioritize safety when handling them. The risks associated with these substances should not be ignored, and every effort should be made to minimize the potential for harm. Regular risk assessments should be conducted to ensure that all potential hazards are identified and accounted for. This includes evaluating the potential risks of the substance to workers, contractors, and the general public. In addition to proper handling and storage practices, emergency response procedures should be established. It is essential that workers familiarize themselves with these procedures and understand the importance of executing them correctly in the event of an accident. Moreover, it is important to note that different types of corrosion inhibitors may have different hazards and characteristics. For instance, some corrosion inhibitors may be more volatile or reactive than others. Therefore, it is crucial to select the appropriate corrosion inhibitor for the specific application and use it accordingly. In some cases, alternative solutions such as material selecti, coatings, or cathodic protection may be more suitable than the use of corrosion inhibitors. It is also important to maintain proper documentation and communication regarding the handling and management of corrosion inhibitors. This includes keeping records of storage conditions, usage, disp, OSAL, and incidents. This information should be readily available for regulatory compliance, risk assessments, and emergency response purposes. Communication channels should be established between WO workers, supervisors, and other stakeholders to ensure that any concerns or issues related to corrosion inhibitors are addressed promptly. Another aspect to consider is the transportation of corrosion inhibitors. Depending on the quantity and characteristics of the substance, it may be subject to various regulations and requirements for